All right, joining us now. She's back with us. She's following some time for us because she's got a busy schedule these days. She's an Olympian, which I know she's proud to have that on the resume as part of the Mexican national team in the most recent Olympics. Also is a Texas A&M All-American great. In fact, Jerry Glasgow, who I spoke to recently, said is one of the maybe the best hitters he's ever coached. That's a high praise there. And of course, she's doing broadcast all over the place. You'll see her on SEC Network. You'll see her on SEC Network Plus, among other places. I speak of Tori Vidales joining us back here on In the Circle. How you doing?
Good. How are you? You're coming with all the facts. I love it.
I
Jared
tr-
Glasgow, one of my favorites.
yeah, I just had him on recently. Talked to him recently because he was in Florida playing UCF, and he was talking about some of the great hitters he was looking for. And he said, like you already had like most of the package ready to go by the time you were at A&M. He's like it was one of the best favorite hitters he's ever got to coach. So that's high praise.
Well, I mean, thankfully it worked out for me because, he has a very specific way of hitting, and I just so happened to already swing the way he likes. So it was a very easy transition for me. And we meshed really well. So it was great and easy to work with him. And I think he thought the same because he would tell me something and I could do it
Yeah.
immediately. So it was such a fun time. I loved him being my coach at A&M for sure.
Absolutely. He said similar high praise. He said, I could tell you that. Let's talk about, first of all, let's talk about what you up to now. Because you're doing a lot of broadcast stuff. So tell the audience
I
that may not
am.
be aware what you're up to this season.
Yeah, so softball season is usually a whirl for me because I'm in so many different places and doing different things. So normally start out calling the games for A&M, the tournaments, usually when 5 games a weekend through SEC Network Plus. So that's on the app. And then also this year I picked up some U of H games as well. So calling a little bit of those and signed back on with SEC Network. So I'll be in studio for most of conference play. Usually around April is when we start to get going. And then other than that, really just calling games, trying to watch as much softball as possible and enjoying this time of the year. It's such a beautiful time outside. It makes me love to watch softball on TV. It makes me want to honestly get in my uniform and lace them up when I feel the sun. It's like energizing. I'm ready to go.
I bet. No, I bet. And we'll get to your playing status and playing career a little bit as well. What's it like balancing now doing A&M games, which you've done for a while now? I mean, back on and off, what, a handful of years, I want to say? Is that an
Yeah,
accurate
since
number?
I've graduated.
Yeah.
So 5 years now. Woo,
Yeah, I didn't
got
want to
on
mention
me
the
quick.
number there. Yeah, I didn't want to mention the number. But you picked up Houston games, and because I watched you do the Houston Washington game recently earlier this year. What's that like
Yeah.
having covering two teams as opposed to just one?
Well, I think it's a little bit more of a challenge, which I always enjoy. For me, A&M has been someone where, I've been in the program, been around the program, so I'm very familiar with the faces, the new coaching staff's come in this year, so I was able to, talk to them, give them some just insight on like how it used to be. We have a group that actually gets together, alumni get together, talk with the head coach Trish Ford, and just talk about the team updates, like what we want to bring in as alums, just kind of bring that camaraderie back between the alum and the current players. And for U of H, it's interesting because I live in Houston, so I'm 20 minutes down the road, and it's a great opportunity for me to watch softball in close proximity to my house, and be able to just go call the game, come back, and still be able to, sit on my computer, watch some games, do a little bit of scouting. But it's so cool noticing just the different nuances of programs or like the type of players they like to recruit or the different strategies. So it's kind of like two ends of the spectrum allow me to kind of be in the middle and see both and be a little bit more balanced going into um, conference play and SEC network studio stuff as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Of course, Houston, it's a big year for them. Kristen Vesely, obviously former Oklahoma Sooner great. It's the head coach at Houston. Courtney Oliver, the associate head coach there. Lacey Waldrop's on that staff. They're in their final year in the American before going to the Big 12 alongside UCF in the American. And then they'll be battling with Wichita State, who's in the top 25 in USF. What was your impressions on Houston from that standpoint, seeing him live when you called the Washington games, as they're going to try to compete in the American before heading over to the Big 12.
Yeah, I think Taria Coleman is a really big bright spot in the lineup. I mean, she was hitting, switching between leadoff, two hole, but just that spark plug that I think U of H really needed this year. And I think that actually makes Janiyah Thomas, who was also flipping between the 1 and 2, a little bit more comfortable in the box. So it's cool just how bringing in one player can really affect the rest of your lineup. And the weekend that I was calling, it was actually some unlikely heroes that came out. And so it was cool to see other people get to shine and really show what they can do early in the season to try to solidify that starting spot.
Now you mentioned A&M, and that's a perfect way to start talk a little SEC softball with you. With who better with Texas A&M, because that is one of the storylines of the SEC this year is Trisha Ford at
Absolutely.
A&M in her first year. As we record this, A&M is playing their first conference series against Arkansas. We do not know the result as where this interview airs, obviously, there. But that being said, they've surprised some in the non-conference with the season they've had. They're in the top 25 in the polls. People kind of didn't know what to expect. What's been your thoughts seeing Coach Ford and the Aggies in 2023?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's a little bit different because again, like I was in the program and I've watched it so closely and I'm invested on a different type of level, but for me, I just see such a difference in the way they're approaching the game. They go up to the plate and they have a plan, and not only do they have the plan, they're sticking to it. Right? I think in the past a lot of times they would create this plan in their head and then they would go up and not execute the plan. So you see there's a big difference there, but also on just the mental side of being confident in yourself. Like I feel like now they're taking the field and you see just like them exuding, like playing bigger. Their frame feels like they're opening up, they're loose, they're laughing, they're having a good time. I think they're really enjoying each other's presence. And you know, the talent side is always going to be there, right? These girls are D1 at a P5 school. Like they're talented. They know what to do to get there, but so many different intangibles come into play when you talk about college softball. And I think finally, like they're starting to get those things off the field that are starting to translate on. And I think it'll still take a little bit of time for them to be as consistent and as dominating of a program, I think, as they used to be. But I think they're very well on their way. And this is only Trisha Ford's first year. I am very excited to watch them just as they grow, maybe getting new players, whoever is going to come in, they're recruiting. So I think the sky is the limit for A&M, and I'm happy every time I see them take the field and just really, really impressed overall.
Yeah, I got to see him in Clearwater and talking to people that follow the program there in Clearwater. Energy. There's an energy there, right? And the players that are there are all bought in. And as a result, I think they've got that chip on the shoulder that they're all bought in. There's that new energy, and they're like, hey, we're better than people, maybe some people on the outside thought.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from Ford being so hard-nosed with them. Like she is very honest with them. She tells them straight up, like, either you need to be better at this or I like this, but you need to change this. So like she's constantly in communication with them, and also she loves on them too. Like she was talking the other night about Emily Kennedy and how great of a job she's been doing. But from last year to this year, what the difference has been her mental, like talking to her about say defense boots a ball before, she would have her body language would start to shrug, and you would see it on her face. And now she's standing a little bit taller, you can't really see it on her face, she's not walking as many batters when things like this are happening. So she's pointing that out to them and letting them know, like, hey, you're not where like we want to be, but you're making progress. And so that gives them a little bit of a confidence boost and realizes, like, hey, coach actually does care about me. And so it makes you feel good going into conference.
When you look at the SEC as a whole, as it's starting now, what is the maybe the biggest question or two you're curious to find out about the SEC 2023 edition this year?
I think for me, the biggest thing is going to be consistency. I think we've seen flashes of great from a lot of these programs, but I'm really looking for one team to just dominate. And I think even a lot of these matchups this weekend, I'm like looking at the matchups, I'm like, oh, that's a close one. Oh, that's a close one. Like I can't pick out a team and be like, oh, this team is going to run away with it. They're going to sweep them, no questions asked, like done and dusted. And I think that comes down to the offense. Yes, we're seeing a lot more power numbers, but the averages I think are a lot lower this year. We're not seeing as many people in the 300s. And if you are, you're seeing like the superstars hitting at 400, 500. So really the bottom half of these lineups, how can they consistently show up for their team and actually make a difference and not have it rely on all of those big names and the people you expect to get the job done.
Yeah, we had Amanda Scarborough on the show before the season for our annual preseason, and she said this is the most wide open she can remember the SEC being, right? There wasn't that clear cut teams. Do you still feel that way, or do you feel a team or two maybe has established themselves as the favorite based on what you've seen so far pre conference?
I think there is a lot of, just neutral feelings, in which Amanda's right. Like, I can't look at a team and just be like, absolutely, this team's going to win. But I think Tennessee has a really great chance this year. They've got some good arms in the circle. I think that's always been a question for Tennessee is who's going to be behind Ashley Rogers.
Yeah.
And now, they pick up the transfer Peyton Gottschall, and then they have the freshman Pickens who throws gas and she can control it. I mean, she threw a perfect game the other day against Appalachian State. So, I mean, now you've got not only one arm, because last year's Erin Edmondson, she graduates.
Right.
Now you bring in two strong arms with Ashley Rogers. Now all you're going to do is give her more time to rest and get through a postseason, which she's been struggling to do in the past as a healthy arm in the circle.
I agree with you. I think Megan Rhodes Smith, the pitching coach, done a heck of a job. That freshman Pickens, to me, it's early, but and LSU's got a freshman pitcher. Those are two pitchers we'll talk about that could make a big difference in the SEC. Could be in the running for SEC Freshman of the Year. And with that deep of a staff, with the offense and Coach Chris Malvo's second year there at Tennessee with Malloy and company, I agree with you. I think the Vols, certainly a team that's been a national host seed. It hasn't been able to get out of the region the last couple of years. This might be the year for Karen Weekly and the Vols to make some noise, not just in the SEC and maybe the favorites, but also once we get to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and I think your argument could literally just be Kiki Malloy because she's so good.
Yeah.
She's hitting over 500 going into conference play. I mean, she can do it all. She can hit for power. She can lay down a bunt. She's so good. I love watching her play. And I think Tennessee has got some really good um, protection around her this year, which is only going to help all of the people in their lineup.
The other team I think is take notice is LSU. They open up with South Carolina. They've got a veteran team. Beth Torina told me all these young players have finally grown up offensively, but they got a young freshman pitcher they like a lot that's helped their circle. What's your thoughts on Beth Torina and the Tigers?
Yeah, I think LSU is in a great spot because of that seniority and just the experience that they bring. And I think in the past, we've seen these same players, right? Some of these players, Taylor Pleasance, Georgia Clark, these people have been here for so long, it seems, but it's because they had such a big responsibility at such a young age. And, last year we saw Pleasance struggle a lot at the beginning to really get going and really see those numbers, those power numbers shoot up. But this year, her and Clark are leading the way in pretty much every single category. So to have those two, the people that you expect to feel that way, I think it gives the team a little bit more confidence going into it. And you're right. I was looking at, I'm going to pull them up right now because the stats for LSU pitching staff. So Allie Kilponen, of course, we know her. We love her. She's a phenom in the circle, has the experience, but Sydney Burzon,
Yeah.
they have identical innings, 0.004 difference in batting average against. It's like 0.030 in OBP. So like every single stat, they've got 44 Ks, 42 Ks, 12 walks, 11 walks. So almost every single stat is identical to one another. And the fact that she's doing that as a freshman against someone like Kilponen, who's been there for years and
Sure.
really proven her way, that's dangerous in the circle. But the question is, can you last the whole conference on two arms, right? You need a third arm to really get in there and solidify that kind of either closing or mid relief type position because these SEC teams, once they do get a hold of your pitchers, it's really hard for you to come back the next day and shut a team down.
I think a lot of teams you could say the same. I think have the similar questions.
Yes.
Arkansas, for example, the defending two-time champions with Courtney Deifel, a very young team this year with a lot of graduation. Shanice Dels is back, but there's questions behind her. Callie Turner, some of the youngsters behind her in the circle, and then offensively they're kind of young. What's your thoughts on Courtney Deifel and the Razorbacks? A two-time defending champs, but a little young. They're hosting the SEC tournament this year. I know you're going to be out there for that, but they're a little young too. It's going to be they've kind of had some ups and downs this year.
Yeah, and I think that's not something you expect as an outsider, right? You're like, why is Arkansas losing all of a sudden? Like they had such a good program. They still do, but they did lose a lot of those big bats, right? I can't think. Lenny Malkin,
Lenny.
Danielle Gibson, all off of my head. I'm like, wow, I'm like, wow, I know these hitters. But yeah, so with losing those big hitters, it's so hard to not only replace power, but kind of like bring that in. And for Hannah Gamble, it's difficult for her now because she has to not only perform, but also lead the way for these younger players and try to get them in the mindset of like, hey, we're two-time defending SEC champs. Like, this is a different standard we have now at Arkansas. Whereas in the past, they were like, all right, let's win 3 SEC games. That's our goal this year. And now they're like, hey, we're winning this. So really for those freshmen, just settling in, finding their way, finding the way that what they bring to the table. But a big one is Reagan Johnson, true triple threat. Seen a lot of power from her, can lay down that bunt, nice little bounce slap. So a lot of speed there. She kind of reminds me of like who was their leadoff hitter? Now I can't remember her name after I said I knew all these hitters.
It's all bad. It's all a blur.
I know they all come in and out, but their leadoff hitter, I can't remember. Hannah McEwen. There we go.
Hannah McEwen.
Just
Yeah.
a lot of power, top of the lineup, a lot of speed, but can also back you up if she needs to. And then Hedgecock coming in with some power numbers. I think I had her. She's leading the country, or at least
She's up
close to
there.
it in home runs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a little bit of power, and then of course Hannah Gamble. I think we saw her in conference start out a little slow, and then really got hot towards the end of the conference play, and then in the SEC tournament as well. So I think it's still so early that a lot of these teams have time to grow and still really get comfortable because you don't want to peak right now. Like honestly, you could go 0 for 3 in the opening weekend and it's fine. Like
Sure.
what you really need to do is prime, learn your lessons now so that when you get to May and you get to postseason, you're ready to go and you're firing on all cylinders.
Agreed. You mentioned pitching. I want to ask you about Missouri because you've seen Missouri in the NCAA tournament the last 2 years. You've done the last two Columbia regionals, as a matter of
Yep,
fact.
I
So
have.
so I feel like Larissa Anderson, like you're like officially a neighbor or something, like where all the times you've been there.
Right.
They've got a lot of arms back, and they got a freshman they're excited about in Harrison, who is was one of the top recruiting pitchers coming out of high school. But they lost so much of that offense personnel graduating. They're very young offensively. They got a new hitting coach and Coach Cottrell coming over from Oklahoma State. I feel though if that offense can come around, those youngsters like a Crenshaw among others, that pitching might be good enough. They've always peaked at the end to host those regionals. What's your is Missouri a team to kind of might be one of those under the radar teams this year because of so much personnel? People think there's a drop off, but they could still be a foe there. A team that made a run to the SEC tournament final.
Absolutely. I think the thing with Mizzou is they're very under the radar and they're not flashy. They get the job done. Coach Larissa Anderson says, we're very blue collar. We work for everything. We get what we work for. But for them, I've seen them really flourish at the end. And then once they get into regionals or super regionals, their bats disappear. And I don't know whether that's just nerves or, not peaking at the right time or whatever it is, getting in their own heads. The pitching the last 2 years in the super and the regional that I called, or both regionals that I called, and then the 1 year that they went to supers in 21, they lost to JMU.
Yeah.
They couldn't find barrels. They just weren't able to get that timely hit, but the pitching was lights out. Lauren Krings, Jordan Weber in the circle have been pretty much a mainstay for them the last 3 years. And they know what to do, right? They've got the stuff. They're very talented. They've got a little bit of it all. And I think they have a good mindset now, especially being older, having the experience. And if they can keep cruising at the same level that they're at, I think they've got the pitching staff to do it. It's going to be a question of can their hitters show up when it matters.
Let's talk about two teams that we usually would talk about at the Open in the SEC. That's Florida and Alabama. Uh, Florida was the lone representative from the SEC last year to get to the World Series. Tim Walton mentions that often. He's like, "Hey, if last year was quote unquote a down year, I'll take 10 of those, considering where they ended up." And then Alabama, a lot of new faces, especially offensively and pitching. Montana Fouts returns. What's your thoughts on the Gators and the Crimson Tide in 2023 from what you've seen so far?
Which one you want first?
I'll give you a start with Florida. They did get to
Okay.
Oklahoma City first. Let's give them that respect.
That's true. Yeah. So Florida is again, like you said, just very I think in their down era, but not in a sense of like, wow, they're so bad, but it's because we have such a high standard for Florida softball. And I heard a stat the other night on watching the broadcast. I think they're ninth in fielding percentage going into this weekend. And I remember hearing that and my eyes went wide. I was like, Tim Walton's defense is ninth in the SEC. Like, there's no way. They've had such phenomenal defenders throughout my career. I mean, alone. Let's see, who did they have? Sophia Reynoso. They've
Hannah
had Hannah
Adams is the big loss,
Adams.
right? That was the
Yeah,
big
Hannah
loss.
Adams.
Yeah,
Huge loss for them. But I think if Skylar Wallace is on, I think that team flourishes. And I think we saw that in Palm Springs when they went, they didn't have Skylar Wallace. She was sick. And I think we saw them drop a lot of games that they wish that they could maybe take back. Of course, they've got Hightower in the circle returning, but I think for Hightower, she has to find that changeup, or else she just becomes Hightower with more innings on her arm. And the screwball can only take you so far whenever the teams figure out
right.
what you're throwing and kind of back up off the plate. But Delbray has really been phenomenal this year compared to last year. She had a lot of control issues last year, but this year we're really seeing her lock in. She's It's so reminiscent of Kelly Barnhill for me. The mechanics and her audible like yell or whatever it is when she pitches.
Yeah,
It reminds me
nuts.
so much of her. And she also has that ball that it'll come in and at the last minute it'll break up, but then she has one at the knees that'll come in and it has the same spin, but it doesn't jump. It just goes straight. So I think that's where she becomes very tricky in having to pick a pitch and really commit to it.
Well, yeah, and Elbray looked up to Kelly Barnhill, so I don't think that's an accident that they're similar
Right.
there in that regard. I mentioned that I heard that on the on the broadcast the other night with Kyle Crooks and Francesca. They were talking about that, and she just coming off a shutout against UCF there. So you're right. And Tim Wallace told me for them to go deep, Delbray's the wild card. She's the key
Yep.
of the staff
I
there
agree.
as well with Hightower. And of course, you mentioned obviously Wallace. They got Charlotte Eccles, who still leads them in RBIs even though she hasn't hit for the power that we're used to, but she's still good. And then Falby and company, they're actually doing pretty well offensively. It'll be interesting how that meshes in the SEC. And then Alabama, you know, up and down. I've seen some great stuff from them. I saw them in Clearwater beat Florida State in a great game. Had a good tournament there, but they've also lost to Lehigh and Kennesaw at home. Kind of some inconsistency from a young Alabama team with Patrick Murphy, one of his youngest teams he's had, especially offensive. But they do have fouls.
Yeah, they do, but that's kind of the question of who can back Fouts up. I think if she's pitching, your team almost expects to win that game, right? Your offense is like, we're doing anything we can to put this W in our column when Montana's on the mound. Whereas I think when Montana's not pitching, it's more of a question mark of, hey, can we pull this one out? And I think to really go far, they have to solidify that number two. I know Jayla Torrance threw a no hitter the other weekend, and it's phenomenal. Like their pitching staff is doing great, but they have to have someone that's competitive. Like, can you do that against ranked teams? Can you do that against teams in the SEC? So it's going to be interesting to see what they do behind Montana. But hitting wise, I mean, Ashley Prangy has been on fire. She's been seeing the ball really well. They've had a lot of new faces come in. So it's always interesting to see the new faces. And Alabama had a tough loss of players this offseason. They lost Dallas Goodnight, Megan Bloodworth, a lot of their key freshmen that would have been a year better this year in the SEC. So now they're almost starting all the way over at the beginning. But for them, I think really relying on the upperclassmen, Ali Shipman, Montana Fouts, Ashley Prangy to kind of get them going and really get them into the SEC mindset of like, hey, this is the grind, but this is what we got to do if we want to be the best. I think they're in good hands. Patrick Murphy knows what he's doing. I mean, he's a great for a reason. So I think they'll struggle with some consistency as well, just at the plate, ups and downs, hot, not hot. But I think when Montana's on the mound, you're gonna see success from them because I feel like they just really want to play behind her. You get those pitchers and you're just like, I will literally throw my body over this fence for you, and she'll do the same.
Yeah, no doubt of that. Let's talk Georgia. I saw them opening weekend. Tony Baldwin, year 2 as the head coach. They added Shelby Walters, the pitcher from Duke, to their pitching staff alongside Kerpix. and company. They have a dynamic offense. When it's clicking, it's as explosive as anybody in the country. What's your thoughts on Georgia? I know people thought in the preseason they could be a sleeper team as far as an SEC contender. Do you feel that way? What's your thoughts on Georgia here with Tony Baldwin year two?
I think Georgia has a lot of great hitters, but again, the consistency is the big question mark. I mean, you've seen them have some really good wins, and then you've seen them kind of have some bad losses at home. I mean, Charlotte and Stetson, I believe.
Yeah,
Stetson for sure. Charlotte beat South Carolina, but Stetson came in and beat them at home, and then they had two losses early to Stanford, which Stanford's
yeah,
really good
Stanford
this year. They've
really
got
good.
a freshman phenom in the circle, but also Clemson as well. I think when we do see them hitting for power, it's all doubles and extra base hits towards the middle of the field, which tells me good things that they're on the ball, they're inside of the ball, they're not getting around the ball, but a lot of flyouts, a lot of flyouts. So they have to figure out a way to kind of, I don't want to say hit for average, but find a little bit more barrel on these balls so that even your mishits are going to get through. And right now, I feel like it's either a swing for the fence or you're
Right.
popping up to the center fielder and then going back to the dugout. So once they start clicking and really understand, like, hey, it's not all about the home run, I think they'll find a little bit more of a groove. But in the circles, like you mentioned, Shelby Walters, huge get for them. Kerpix took a lot of the innings last year. I know her arm was probably exhausted after the season, but actually, they played Auburn last year in a 3-game series. They lost two, and Kerpix actually had both two losses and a win
Win. Yeah.
for them. So Auburn hitters know Kerpix like the back of their hand. So now when you introduce Walters, I'm wondering how well can she stifle the Auburn hitters.
Well, you mentioned Georgia, and I think diversity in that offense is the key. I spoke to Tony Baldwin before the season started. That's Dallas Goodnight. One of the reasons they added Dallas Goodnight and the freshman Goodwin, who they like. He's trying to add some diversity. He admits that last year they were too dependent on the long ball, and he wants more small ball, a little bit more speed, more try to score in different ways. You know, you're right. That's going to be the key. Is Goodnight, can she bring that to them? That's why she's there, as well as Goodwin and a couple. So he does agree with you. He feels they're too dependent on the home run. Tremendous when you have players like Kearney and Fields and Chambly. Makes sense. But he knows to get back to OKC, they got to find some diversity on that offense, and he's hoping that players like Goodnight can make that difference.
Yeah, and really good night. I was thinking of this, that she reminds me of back when Georgia had the Emmanuel sisters. You know,
Yeah,
the speed at the top of the lineup. If either one of them got on, it was a nightmare. But if both of them got on, it was like, okay, well, here's two runs for you. Like they just found a way to score them no matter what because speed puts pressure on the defense. And Goodnight will be a huge help, I think, in conference play of not only just the speed on the base pass, but getting them in motion a little bit more. I think some of those hits may be able to fall if you get the defense in motion when that runner is trying to steal a base.
a team that maybe has the opposite problem that Georgia has from the standpoint is Auburn, who has great pitching, uh, but offensively suspect. In fact, I just watched them play Georgia Tech, lose on a walk-off. Mickey Dean was quoted in the press release, they just out-hit us. They didn't hit much in that game. What's your thoughts on the Tigers? We know about Penta, we know about Shelby Lowe, we know about the arms they have, but do they have enough offense to be a factor in the SEC?
Well, see, I was thinking the same thing of like, okay, where is their offense? And then I go and look at the stats. 7 out of 8 of their eligible players, so one plate appearance per game, they're hitting over 300. And they have 3 hitters that are over 400 right now. So to me, it seems like they're finding ways to get on base and not necessarily getting the timely hits. So you'll see some home runs there out of, Bree Ellis, Denver Bryant has hit a couple. So, I mean, you see these like sparks of greatness, and then you get singled to death, and you're like, okay, we need that really big hit to just open up the gates and like score a lot of runs because Maddie Pinta has been pitching her, what off in the circle. And she really needs that support behind her. I mean, she had a .00 ERA before or the Georgia State game. Now she's at .11.
Oh, what's wrong with her?
Terrible. But I
Unbelievable.
think that's going to be the question is can they show up? I think Auburn and Georgia is one of those series where I look at and I'm like, either team could take this because both of them have pitchers in the circle that can sling it. It's going to come down to who's going to be more consistent, who's going to make the adjustments first.
One of the Kentucky, it's always a team there. Rachel Lawson and company, Kayla Kowalik, who seems to have been there forever. Uh, Good offense in the pitching. What's your thoughts on the Wildcats this year for Rachel Lawson? They want to take to the big next step. Talking to Coach Lawson, they've hosted regionals, but they're usually in the back end in the teens. They want to try to push it to a top 8 seed if they can. I don't know. We'll see how they do this year. Obviously, in conference will play a role in that. But what's your thoughts on Kentucky?
I think Kentucky is always going to be a team that you can kind of put an asterisk by and say they're going to be fun to watch. And that's, they've got a lot of speed, they've got a lot of power, but they play hard. They play very aggressive and almost very scrappy, right? It's not a team where you look at and you're thinking like, wow, these girls are so strong or wow, these girls are so fast. It's kind of like, wow, these girls are athletes. And I know that they could do anything that they need to find a way to win. And that's what I like watching about them because they win in a lot of different ways. And I think a lot of teams could learn from them in that aspect of pushing runs across with, a squeeze bunt or a pullback slap. They do a little bit of everything. But like you said, Kowalik, just phenomenal, such a great leader for them. Erin Koffel is also getting
Yeah.
hot right now. And then Vanessa Nesby as well. In the last 8 games, she's hitting over 400. So a lot of speed from the left side. The question mark for me is going to be in the circle again because we see Lacatena obviously has a lot of speed, and then Schoonover, who's really shined for them this season. But again, those two are the really big mainstays, and then it's like, and Harrison as well. I'm sorry, don't mean to slight you, girl, but um, finding the mix between the newness of a new arm, right? A freshman, none of these teams know who she is, what she throws, as much as they do from someone like a Schoonover or a Lacatena, who's already had a couple years in the SEC for these players to really scout them. So freshmen could help or it could hurt because they lack experience, but that is also they've never seen you. So you never know what they're going to pull out of their back pocket.
When you last year, people were stunned by Mississippi State when they knocked off Florida State in the regional, got to the super regionals. That was perhaps one of the bigger surprises there. Do you see an SEC team, whether it's Mississippi State again, whether it's Ole Miss, whether it's South Carolina, any of those teams you think could surprise people? And we're talking in 2 months from now, like, whoa, can you believe that team, what they just pulled off? Blank. Do you see any of that? And it might be a team that we've already talked about. But is there any of
Right.
those teams in the SEC that are like, hey, nobody's going to talk about this team all year, but they're going to sneak up on people come postseason?
Ooh, I think most of the ones that I'm looking at that I feel like could be that have already been ranked this year. So I don't know if that
Right. It's
necessarily
hard to
counts,
find in
but
the SEC, right? When you have like
right. I
nine
think
teams ranked. Yeah.
Auburn could be one of those teams that shows up really late and is just hot, and they play with just a lot of, fierceness. They just go for it. They're not afraid to be themselves on the field, which I always enjoy to watch. I think that could play on their side, and especially playing behind someone like a Maddie Pinta and a Shelby Lowe. I mean, you've got it in the circle. How much can your offense show up? Another one that I think, not to be a homer, but A&M, they've got a phenomenal pitching staff this year. They've got a little bit of everything. They've got right hard, left slow, right slow. So they've got a very complete staff. The thing for me, I think, is going to be the defense and the mental errors, just like not understanding what's happening in the game or what's going on. But I think as you go and you get more comfortable, those kind of start to disappear. Whereas at the beginning in these big tournaments, it's easy to get overwhelmed and have your brain working a mile a minute. So slowing the game down, but I think they have the potential to do it. I think it's going to be up to them if they're really going to get it done.
Shanice Dells became a household name last year with her performance as they got into conference. We've seen this every year. There's always that player that breaks out and becomes a name in the sport because of how they perform in the SEC. Do you have a player in mind or two that you think, hey, this player is going to be talked about a lot by the time we get to Fayetteville at the SEC tournament and into the SEC and the NCAA's?
Immediately, I think Kiki Malloy. I mean, she has so many ways to shine that it makes it easy to talk about her. A lot of times, you either talking about a power hitter or somebody that's just an all-around player, like a KB Sides of last year. I think Kiki Malloy and KB Sides have similar games in the sense of they both have a little bit of power, they both have a lot of speed. So she's one that I always keep my eye on no matter what. I'm like, all right, what's Kiki up to? Like, let me go look at her stats. Let me go see what she's doing. Another one could be Taylor Pleasance. I mean, I think it's been pretty silent about LSU. Maybe they're one that's under the radar that we haven't seen much of. And again, a freshman in the circle with an experienced
Sure.
arm in Kilponen. So they could be one that really comes up, and they got upset last year too at a regional, didn't they?
Lost. They went to Tempe, went 0-2 there when they went to Tempe in that regional. That Arizona State ended up beating San Diego State. They just kind of drew a bad draw there going out west.
Yeah, that was a tough regional, but again, like, that's a team where you go out there and you expect them to come back, but San
Yeah.
Diego State and Fullerton both had a solid year last year, and I think LSU has the potential 100%. I think I'm gonna change my answer. I'm gonna go LSU.
Okay, I like that. Now you get a good segue there. You mentioned regionals. You've gotten to call a regional the last 2 years,
Mhm.
in your both in Columbia, as I mentioned there. Uh, what was that like for you to work a regional as a broadcaster after being involved in regionals as a player?
Yeah, so my first year was actually in 21, so everything was still remote, so I called that one from Austin, which was nice for me because it was a closer drive. But yeah, I called that one with Tyler Denning, and that was a great experience because him and I meshed really well. And so it kind of like eased me into calling a regional, feeling a little bit more like, okay, I can do this. Like, this is calm. I'm just talking about the game. So I felt more confident going into last year's regionals. And actually, the play by play that was with me, Angel Gray, she had really only called one softball game prior to calling the regional. So it was a little bit of like a, hey, here's some tips, like from the softball, you maybe whether it was, terminology or just like the nuances of the game. And she picked it up so quick, and it was fun to get to experience her learning as we went too, and really getting better and better as the games went on. But I think it's such a different feel being in the environment, like being at the field, getting to be around the players, getting to say hi to the coaches, hearing the fans. Like, that's one of my favorite things is like the gnat sounds, I hear the crowd chatter and the girls in the dugout. But I've loved it. I think it's really helped me grow as a broadcaster and understand, the different journeys that teams take to get to the postseason, and really that any team can win on any given day because we've seen a lot of upsets in regionals and super regionals as well. So I've loved it so much. I'm hoping I get to call another one this year, and just really enjoying my time behind the mic and spreading the knowledge of softball.
Compare being in the booth as an analyst, like you do not only in the regionals, but you do with A&M and now Houston, versus being in a studio like you
Oh
are on
yeah.
SEC Network. Compare compare the two roles because they're different roles. So how do you compare those two?
Very different. So being an analyst for in the studio is very much so like big picture things, right? So what is LSU doing this week? Like, who do they play? Who's hot right now? Like, Taylor Pleasance started off hot this year compared to last year. So I'm talking more big things, and a lot of times we're discussing what we want to talk about before we go into the show so that we have it ready and we kind of know where we want to go and what direction we're going. Whereas when you're in the booth with the mic, you're calling the game as it comes. So it's more, off the dome in terms of knowledge and knowing when to speak versus in studio, you're a little bit more prepared in sense of pre-prepared. And it's very in real time in the analyst. But the prep is similar, but I would say you definitely have to do more prep as a color commentator because there's so much going on in the moment that you can't just go look that up and just be like, okay, let me take 5 minutes to Google something, right? You have to have it at your hand. So being prepared in that sense of, having all of my stats out, having all of my lineups out, having my stat broadcast up, and there's a lot more aspects that go into it. Whereas studio, I get to look pretty and talk about softball of why these teams are good, and then the show's over until the next night. So it's like 30 minutes compared to 3 hours. So very different spectrums, but very good in terms of well-roundedness and learning the game and learning the TV world. And I've really enjoyed doing both.
Do you have a preference?
I think my preference right now is studio, only because I'm so excited to go back. I haven't been back since last year, so I'm just really excited. But I think whatever one I'm doing that day is my favorite
There you
because
go.
I get
That's
to
fair.
just like switch it up and do both. And it's almost like how people say play two sports growing up. I played volleyball and softball, so whenever I was done with volleyball, I was so excited to get back to softball, and then I was tired of softball, I would be so excited to get to volleyball. It's the same thing with studio and in the booth, so it just gives you a little bit more extra push to feel good and be good at both of them.
Well, and you got to do on site studio with Madison Shipman, with Caleb Bro, and Alyssa Lang was the host last year. And what was that experience like to do it on site versus in a controlled studio?
Oh my gosh, it was so fun, also so nerve-wracking. I was nervous, and, all 3 of them are pros at this, right? They've done multiple SEC tournaments, so I felt like the new kid coming in, but it was so great. Maddie and Kayla have, been very welcoming and very, like, open to answering any questions that I have, and, Alyssa, I see her all year in the spring, or all spring, I should say, and just she had gotten engaged like the week after, and we had had like long talks about all of our lives behind the scenes and stuff. So we had a lot of downtime. So it was really cool to like get to be around them and just be around the sport. And everybody's watching and we get to break it down and had people, texting all week and asking, "Oh my God, what's the environment like?" And it was just such a great time. I'm so excited that we get to do it again this year in Arkansas. If anybody has any recommendations for food, hit me up.
Ooh, I might know people that I'll get you in touch with. Maybe
Hey,
I could
there we
figure
go.
it. I could try to work it out. Now, when we had you last time, we had you on about 3 years ago. This was right when you had just qualified for the Olympics with the Mexican national team, and I remember I asked you about what that would mean for your broadcasting. You admitted that your focus was in the Olympics at the time, and then
Mhm.
after you were done with the Olympics, you were going to try to figure out if you could, broadcasting and playing. Like if you wanted to just focus on broadcasting, if you try to mix both, etc. Now, obviously, since then, you participated in the Olympics. You've played for Athletes Unlimited and broadcasting. Where are you as far as your playing status moving this year and moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see an end in the foreseeable future for now. I mean, I have such a great schedule that really from spring in February, Marchish to August, I'm busy, and then for the rest of the year, I get to just, like, do whatever I need to do and hang out with my family and, just go visit my brother in Vegas where he lives. He just had a baby, so I get to go see my niece and do all the things that I felt like I missed out on as a collegiate athlete or just as an elite athlete growing up in general. I feel like there's a lot of things that I didn't get to do myself. So now with that off time, I get to do that and still enjoy and reap the benefits of calling games and playing. So I enjoy it a lot, and I don't see an end in the near future if that's something that I continue to do and I stay healthy and it still brings me joy. So for right now, I know I'm signed for this season, this upcoming season, hopefully at least 2 more. So we'll see. Never
Okay.
know.
So you're back with Athletes Unlimited, though. We'll see you back in Rosemont.
Yes, you will.
What's that been like for you, being part of Athletes Unlimited?
It's amazing. I am fortunately a part of the player executive committee, the PEC. So Athletes Unlimited is fully player run. There's no GMs, there's no coaches. Really, it's the full time staff and the 5 of us. So it's myself, Sam Fisher, who's our chairperson, Amanda Lorenz, and Andrea Filler and Sis Bates. And so the 5 of us get together every week with all of the full timers, including, our co-founders, Sherry Kemp, who's our director of sport, all of the people who have a say in anything. And we make those decisions every week, whether it's uniforms or tryouts or rosters or, whatever. We're probably hearing about it before anybody else is. So that's been great. And I think Athletes Unlimited just does such a great job of supporting us, not as only athletes, but as women and as people. So I've loved every part of being with Athletes Unlimited, and I'm hoping that the players now in college see how special it is, and that they want to come play for AU eventually. when they
What what
graduate.
what do you think's the next step for AU? That you'd like to see in softball there, because I know you keep growing. Obviously, it was announced that both the summer, the summer version, which I thought was a really big popularity positive right after the World Series, kind of
Mhm.
feed off that World Series momentum, and then the regular season tour there. What do you think is the next step for Athletes Unlimited?
Yeah, so right now we have champ season, which is the 5 week long competition schedule, and then we have AUX, which is going to be in the beginning of June, and that's about 2.5 weeks, and a little bit smaller of a roster. For me, I think just providing opportunities for softball players, whether that means increasing the roster size or maybe creating more teams within AU in general. So instead of going 4 teams, you have 6. I think you could do a lot of things traveling and around the world, giving clinics. I think there's a lot of things that this league can bring, but I think it's important that you don't try to rush it too fast so that you are very stable as a business and people know that they're getting a good product when they like hire AU or they want to come watch a game, that they know they're getting a top-notch product every single time. And right now I think AU is doing a great job of that. So I think a few more years before really we start to change anything up in my head makes sense. But honestly, our co-founders, their minds are consistently working. They're businessmen themselves, John Patrickoff and Jonathan Soros. So they've done a great job at leading us and really putting us in good positions for opportunities for the league and for us as professional softball players.
Well, that's exciting. I'm excited to see you there in Rosemont. I know Victor covered it, or my producer co-host covered it this past summer. We're probably going to go back this summer. Maybe you could tell us where to go to eat at Rosemont. We could trade.
Oh
We'll hook
yeah.
you up in Fayetteville. You hook, we can have mutual friends. Hook us up all
Hey,
day,
I'll
right?
trade you any day.
I
Food,
like
I'm
that.
in.
Deal. I would be remiss if I didn't mention obviously the Olympics. What was that experience like for you? I know it was a unique Olympics for everybody, but what was it like to be part of a Summer Olympics? That's always going to be part of your career there. And do you allow yourself to even think about maybe trying for 28, or is that too far?
I think for me, 28 is out. A lot of us retired from international ball, and at least from Team Mexico standpoint. And
Sure.
I think a lot of that comes from not having support from our coaches and not being treated like professional athletes and like women that have been playing the sport their entire lives. We were very disrespected along our entire career. So for us, or I should say for me in general, it was a very hard time in our lives. And I think not a lot of people knew what was going on. Our coaches were not respectful human beings to us and tried to claim our successes as their own and really just kind of didn't. I honestly don't want anything to do with them ever again. So my Olympic experience was very different from I'm sure a lot of people's, and even on our team in general, like everyone's going to have a little bit of a different experience. But I think the biggest takeaway is our team and how close we were, and we truly were like sisters and are like sisters. And that relationship means more to me than all of the BS we went through because, I still talk to these girls every single day and we're talking about, our lives and our futures. And I wouldn't have met them without Team Mexico. So I do owe a lot to Team Mexico and the girls, but respectfully, I can never hear from them again and be perfectly happy. And I'm an Olympian, and that's an amazing accomplishment. And I'm so thankful for that. That's one of the dreams that every softball player has. And for me to be able to say that I accomplished that is a huge feat. And I'm so proud of myself for sticking through it. And nobody will be able to take that away from me ever. So knowing that I can tell my kids about it one day and, pass that along and have them meet their aunties that played in it as well is going to be quite a great day for sure.
No, absolutely. And I've heard that you're not the first player to have said that, so I appreciate the candor. I mean, do you all felt like you were misled, kind of to some extent? Go if you in retrospect.
I don't think, well, maybe not misled. I don't think that's the right word to describe it, but I think at the beginning, we really stuck around in this program. I know for myself, I started in 2016 before the Olympics were even back into the cycle for softball. And so I was playing solely on my love for the game and my
Yeah.
respect for my family and where I came from. And so it really hurts when people are like, oh, Mexico, they were just full of Americans. But I'm like, a lot of us were on the team before the Olympics were even back in, and the stuff that we went through, like if people knew, what we were eating, and like we were having pizzas because it was the cheapest thing we could find for lunch and dinner every
Right.
single day for like a week and a half. We were eating rice and beans out of a crock pot for lunch and dinner in a Canada tournament because that was our team budget and that's all we could get. So we went through a lot, and I think once we qualified for the Olympics, our coaches kind of switched up on us and we're like, okay, now it's our rules, and if you don't listen to what I say, we're going to kick you off. And they threatened to kick all of us off and take all of the junior team, and we were like, that's a little bit dangerous, but okay.
Yeah.
um so it was like an up and down ride, but I think it really changed once we qualified for the Olympics. They told us that we weren't qualified, that they were qualified, so that they could take anybody they wanted to take.
Right. Like you said earlier,
um
taking too much credit that they probably, right. Getting,
Yeah, so they thought it was all of them, and in reality, they really didn't know the game of softball. They didn't call the pitches, they didn't call the play. They literally just stood at the bases, and that was about it. So, credit to our team. I think we did a lot of incredible things under the circumstances that we were in, and we did that. I mean, we got to the bronze medal game, and we gave Canada a hell of a fight, and I'm proud of that. And I think the respect too, from the other teams, talking to a lot of the Canada girls and AU after, a lot of the USA girls, just opening up about all of our experiences. I think even they didn't know what we were going through.
right.
And so they were like, wow, I could not tell, like, respect to you guys. And even Danielle Laurie put out a post after about like how proud she was to be an Olympian, and people that are Olympians that didn't medal are just as worth it, as are
Yes,
just as proud, because going to the Olympics is not a small feat. And even if you don't medal, you're still one of the best in the world. And so,
for sure.
and she was, throwing out a bunch of respect to us, and we, have the most respect for DL and everything she did. So it was just cool. We were all able to come together and kind of go over our experiences together. And a lot of us face some similar circumstances. So it's cool to know that you're not alone in that situation. I think that's the best thing about softball, is that it's a team sport as well. So I love my girls. I would do anything for them, my witches forever. And we held it down as much as we
No,
could, for sure.
you did. No, you did, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's a pretty amazing what you all went through and accomplished, considering what you were going through. So thank you for sharing that. I'll leave you on this note. Nationally, Oklahoma is obviously the favorites for the national title. Them and Texas are going to go to the SEC in a couple of years. What's your thoughts on that? OU and Texas joining the SEC in a couple of years. That's going to be pretty wide. Make this SEC even like a bigger juggernaut than it already is.
Yeah, I was about to say, if anything, it just adds to the difficulty of a season, and especially a conference season at that. But really, it's good for the softball world in general in terms of good softball being played. And I think for OU, I think they're going to have a little bit more losses going into postseason and really get challenged more. I mean, you see them get challenged and they show up time and time again, but you got to think like it's different when you're playing, an Iowa State on one weekend and then going into Texas, and then you get a break, and then you go back and you play a hard game. When in the SEC, it's hard game, hard game, hard game, hard game every single weekend. So it is a gauntlet, and I think they're going to be successful 100%. They've got the talent, they've got all the resources that they need to be great, but I think there's just going to be more challenges, and you can't win everything. So somebody's going to beat them, and they're going to have a few more losses, I think, going into postseason for sure.
It also means we get Texas A&M in the regular season finally, after
I
just instead of just
know. Oh my
regionals.
gosh. I know. So I see all the posts now with football, Texas and A&M being like huge rivals. I think they care about it more on the football side, but now I'm hoping that they're back. It's going to renew the rivalry. I think it's such good fun, like to be in college and have that one team that you just love to hate. So having that, and then any reason for me to talk smack to Kat, so it would be great.
Cat, well, be careful. Cat, as you know, likes to bring it. Will bring it back if you decide to
She
bring it.
does. No, I know. I love it. Our candor is great with one another. We just go back and forth, and we banter, and it's so much fun. But she, at the end of the day, she'll throw up a thumbs up.
Well, you got, yeah. You and Scarborough can double team her. I mean that's the thing,
Exactly.
right? I mean, you two could double team her. I mean, Jamie Low Price. I mean, could get in the mix. I mean,
Girl gang.
oh boy, that could be real tough there. But Tori, I always appreciate you taking the time from the busy schedule. Tell the audience where they can follow you, especially as the season continues, because I know people want to see where you're broadcasting and what you're up to, as well as playing in the summer. What's the best place to follow you?
Yeah, you can follow me really on any social medias, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, not really Facebook, but all the other 3 at Vidales Tori, very easy. I'm hoping to do a couple TikToks of maybe like behind the scenes, like day in the life at the network. That way people can maybe get a sneak peek of what I do in the studio as well as calling games. So it'd be a cool little behind the scenes moment if they're interested.
Ooh, people are always interested in the behind the scenes stuff. I can tell you that.
Y-
Courtney
Oh
Lyle
yeah.
does that all the time. I had Courtney, and she does that all where every broadcast. She does behind the scenes footage stuff. So
It's so fun. People have no idea what goes on when they're not there in the booth,
that's correct. Makes them feel like they're a part of it. So no, we
right?
definitely we thumbs up. We hope to see that, and again, hope to talk to you down the road there. But thanks for talking to us, like as always.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.